Hello everyone. So today we are going to be learning about this new story, An Angel in Disguise. It is a big story, but the theme of the story is very beautiful. Okay, this story is written in very simple English, so I will be just giving you a short summary of it, and then I will tell you about the justification of title and some important things that are uh, shown in the story. So, this story is basically about a young paralyzed girl who gets adopted by a family, and 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 these events change the life of the paralyzed girl and also the life of the family that adopts the girl. Okay, so in the beginning of the story, there is a poor woman who is hated by nearly everyone in her village. And she died of intoxication, meaning that she drank too much and then she died. She died in front of her three children. And what were the names of these three children? It was John, Kate, and Maggie. So, despite the hatred for the woman, even when she died, everyone in the village came and they showed sympathy for the children. So, among the children, John, he was the oldest. He was a boy of age 12 and he was adopted by a farmer whose name was Jones. So he got adopted because since he was a young boy, the farmer thought that he could have use for him in the fields as labor. So John was adopted. Next, who was adopted? Next was Kate. She was between 10 and 11 and she was taken in by Mrs. Ella. Okay, so she was taken in by Mrs. Ella, who was looking for a maid. So I don't think that anyone took them out of sympathy. Everyone had their separate uses or separate greed on how to put the children to use. So they got adopted. The farmer adopted the boy so he could work in the fields, and Mrs. Ella adopted Kate so she could serve as a young maid. But the dead woman's third child, Maggie, who had been injured and her spine was damaged. So she was injured from nearly 2 years ago and was crippled from the waist down. So she was paralyzed from her waist, and since she did not serve any purpose, she could not do any work, and people had to take care of her. She was too much of a burden. So nobody decided to take her in. The ladies in the neighborhood brought discarded clothes and dressed Maggie in clean clothes. Maggie's innocent looks attracted everybody, but no one dared to take her in because, as I said, that taking her in meant that the people who would take her in, there would be an increase in responsibility because Maggie was sick or she was injured from the waist down. After a discussion, it was decided that Maggie should be sent to the poorhouse, where she would be kept clean, provided with healthy food, and given medical treatment. The next day, after the burial of their mother, John and Kate were taken away by their new families, and poor little Maggie was left alone. When Maggie saw Mr. Joe Thompson, she begged him not to leave her there all alone. So, Maggie saw that there was Mr. Joe Thompson. So he is one of our protagonists of the story. So Maggie begs him and tells him that please don't leave me alone. And Joe, he was a kind-hearted man. He loved children. So out of sympathy, he wrapped Maggie gently in clean bedclothes and he took her home. As Joe held Maggie close to his chest, he formed a bond of affection with her. So among all the villagers, only Joe was the one who took Maggie out of sympathy. The rest of the people they took the children to satisfy their own purposes or greed. So when Joe Thompson took Maggie home, he was confronted by his short-tempered wife, and Joe told her that he was just letting her stay at their house for the night, and he would take Maggie to the poorhouse the next day. Joe talked to his wife and told her how Jesus rebuked his disciples who did not help little children, and how he himself took up the children in his arms and blessed them. So Joe tells his wife that Jesus rebuked his disciples, meaning that he told his disciples to go away, those who did not love children, and Jesus would often take children up in his own arms and bless them. The name of Joe's wife was Jane, and she did not answer Joe's justification that why he had brought Maggie home. She thought that Joe had a soft corner for Maggie. She went to the little chamber where Maggie was and talked to her. Gradually, she developed affection and love for Maggie. She began to feel motherly affection for her as she had no children of her own. So, the main reason why Jane Thompson, the wife of Joe Thompson, was irritated and in a bad mood always was because she never had any children of her own. And when she had this opportunity to even show a bit of motherly love and affection, she started having affection and love for Maggie. She began to feel motherly affection for her as she had no children of her own. So gradually, days passed, and Jane did not utter a word about sending Maggie to the poorhouse. Finally, Joe and Jane decided to keep Maggie with them as their child. This brought love and happiness in the life of the married couple. So the married couple was sad because they did not have any children of their own, and Maggie filled that gap for them. She brought happiness into the lives of the Thompson family. They felt as if an angel had come into their house in the form of Maggie and filled their lives with sunshine of love. So this is a very beautiful story. Next up, I'm going to be telling you about how the title, An Angel in Disguise, is a proper title. That is, the title suits the story. Okay. So, in Angel in Disguise, this title is very much appropriate for the story. This plot, the plot in the story, it revolves around Maggie, a bedridden child who brings happiness in the life of the childless couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, and thus acts like an angel for them. Maggie, after her mother's death, was left all alone in the house. Due to a spinal cord injury, she could not walk and was bedridden. Though everybody in the village pitied her, nobody was willing to take her in. However, Mr. Joe Thompson, who was a compassionate man, felt it cruel to leave Maggie alone. He feared that his wife Jean would not welcome Maggie. However, he took her home. Joe, in fact, could connect with Maggie the moment he took her in his arms and felt as if love had sprung into his life. Joe's wife, after initial inhibitions, grew fond of Maggie and gave up the thought of sending her away to a poorhouse. It seemed that Maggie gave her a purpose in life. Like I said in the story, Jane Thompson did not have any children of her own. So Maggie filled this void and finally gave Jane Thompson a purpose to live. She transformed her from an irritable and ill-tempered woman to a loving, caring person. Joe Thompson felt as if an angel had come into their house, disguised in the form of the helpless Maggie, and filled their home and hearts with the sunshine of love. Okay, so now I will discuss the themes that are reflected in the story. First is selfishness versus selfishness. So selfishness is a theme of the. It is one of the main themes of the story. Farmer Jones and Mrs. Elise. Sorry, I said Mrs. Ella, but it is Mrs. Elise. They depict selfishness and sorry, I said the theme is selfishness versus selfishness. Sorry. It is selfishness versus selflessness. So, selfishness is showed by the two people who adopt the boy, John, and the woman, Mrs. Elise, who adopts Kate. Farmer Jones wanted the boy John to work in the fields, and Mrs. Elise only adopted Kate because she wanted a maid. So they got adopted because the people who adopted them did not adopt them out of charity, but they did it because of their own selfish reasons. And Mrs. Joe Thompson, Maggie did not have any use, nor she could be of any use. Rather, she was a burden. Still, Joe Thompson, he adopted Maggie. This shows selflessness. The mother of the three children, John, Kate, and Maggie, dies, and Farmer Jones and Mrs. Ellis taking John and Kate for their selfish reasons. Farmer Jones takes in John to look after his farm, whereas Mrs. Ellis takes in Kate as a maid. Nobody in the village agrees to take in the paralyzed Maggie. One of the villagers suggests that she should be taken to the poorhouse, but Mr. Thompson, out of compassion, takes Maggie home along with him. Mr. Thompson's selflessness is reflected when he does not leave Maggie alone, but bears the precious burden home and faces his wife's anger. Second is love versus redeemer. The story portrays the redeeming power of love through the character of Mrs. Thompson. Joe Thompson's wife is hard-hearted at the beginning of the story. She scorns at her husband for bringing the invalid child home, but she is transformed in the end. It appears as if the woman had turned bitter earlier because of being childless, but as soon as the love of a child touches her, she is transformed. Mrs. Thompson gets angry with her husband for bringing home the sick brat. Here, the sick brat is Maggie, and inquires from him the reason for not taking Maggie to the poorhouse. But Joe knows what his wife secretly craves for. That is, his wife secretly craved for a small child, so she could be a mother. So she could show motherly love and affection. So Joe leaves Maggie to bond with her wife, sorry, his wife, Jane Thompson. While coming back from work, he sees a light shining through the little chamber window, and this was the first object that attracted Joe's attention, as it was a good omen. Earlier, there was anger in his wife's speech, but when Joe asked for supper, there is no asperity in her voice. The love for the child has changed her. She no longer wishes to send away the child to the poorhouse, but wants to take care of her as a mother. Mrs. Thompson, by the end, is not an irritable, ill tempered, and self afflicting woman, but a loving, mother like figure. The love of an angel in disguise thus redeems her.